Some call it Brexit. That's a British exit from the EU party, in case you didn't know. And that's exactly what Boris Johnson is set to recommend, unless Brussels reforms. That's the key point in this report. The Lord Mayor of London will release the report right here at Bloomberg HQ in London this morning. And he will say that the outcome would be for the UK, the better outcome would be for the UK to stay in a reformed UK. For more on the research paper is the Director of Open Europe, Stephen Booth. He joins us now. Great to have you with us this morning, Stephen. I mean, in many ways, when you read all the press reports around this, which is Boris Johnson, Gerard Lyons, his chief economist, saying, look, reform the EU would be the best scenario, and Britain has nothing to fear leaving the European Union if the PM fails to achieve sufficient reforms. Right-wing rhetoric or good sense?
Well, I think he's right to say that being in a reformed EU is the best option. I think being in the EU means we have access to the single market. We also have voting rights on the terms of trade in the single market. But I think it's also true to say that there will be no economic disaster if we left the European Union. But I think the devil will be in the detail. The question is, what kind of access can we get to that market from the outside, and what voting rights and what influence will we have on the rules coming in out of that market? That's the question that I think is still uncertain.
And as I read through some of the other, these are leaks, or a sieve, whatever you'd like to call it. Like, it's been very well flagged. Gerard wrote in the Evening Standard yesterday evening, it's all over the papers. He's talking about numbers. He's talking about the reality of the City of London, which is very near our office, and he's talking about the reality. And that is that millions of jobs could be created here in London if there is a reformation of the EU. However, to stay with the status quo, you're looking at something like 200,000. I mean, that makes it pretty simple, straightforward, pure logic to me. They've got to get reformation of the EU to convince the economics.
Well, I think that's the key conclusion from this report. Basically, this report, the status quo is not an option, in the sense of that if things stay the same, that's not good for the UK economy, it's not good for the European economy, really. So we have to see reform, and if that reform doesn't happen, leaving we shouldn't be scared of the threat of leaving.
Gerard Lyons, the economic advisor to Boris Johnson, the London Mayor, Stephen, also said last night, he said the best scenario is to be in a reformed EU, but leaving on good terms and providing sensible policies does provide a very strong outcome. That jumped out at me, on good terms. How can we leave on good terms?
Well, I think one way of doing that is actually making a genuine effort to try and reform the club. I think just sort of stamping our feet and saying we want to leave for no good reason, I think it doesn't make much sense. I think what we have to do is set out a reform agenda that other people can potentially buy into. If that doesn't work out, then I think we can look at other options. And I think we did some wargaming of these scenarios.
Right.
And I think one of the things that came from that was that it is key what other member states are willing to agree to on a Brexit scenario. It's also key what the EU institutions will agree to, because the European Parliament, at the end of the day, will actually have to approve any continuity deal that the EU and the UK do.
What about the new president, Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker? I mean, is he more against the idea, as many feared, is he more against the idea of giving Britain concessions, or are the early sounds positive that he might be open to the idea of reforming the EU?
Well, I think it's actually too early to say. I think it could go either way with Juncker. I think the key will actually be the national governments and Chancellor Merkel in Berlin. And I think she has expressed enthusiasm for reform of the EU. The question is, what does the UK put forward? I think there are other countries, particularly in Northern Europe, that really want to see a more slimmed-down, trade-focused EU, where the European Commission focuses on a core set of tasks, which is about boosting trade in the single market and boosting trade around the world, and concentrating on few of the things that tend to annoy the public and also annoy business in terms of regulation, and also other areas like justice and home affairs and so on.
When you bring up Jean-Claude Juncker and we look at the media frenzy that there was in this country about his appointment, a lot of people that I speak to say that what Europe has just done is a representation of a lack of desire to change and reform. The appointment of Juncker is perhaps a PR death knell in this country. I mean, that doesn't show a reformationist. And Merkel, she turned around and supported it.
Yeah, I think that was a great concern. I think more steps in that direction, I think you're going to see the risk of Brexit increasing, because it was not only the personality, it was the process involved. It was basically allowing the European Parliament to set the agenda and not the national governments, and that's something that I think is anathema to people in the UK.
What are the ramifications of today's report to the A, the political body, and B, the public? Are there ramifications? Boris Johnson says, you know, essentially, I've got the courage to leave Europe.
That's politicking.
Well, of course it is. I mean, he apparently is going to stand for Parliament. He'll announce that in the next few weeks.
Well, I think
the implications.
PM Johnson.
Well, I think it means if the Conservatives do win a general election, that Brexit is on the agenda. There is a possibility it could happen if there isn't significant reform of the way the European Union functions and of the UK's relationship with it.
Seemingly, last night's debate came down to the pound, didn't it?
Yeah, and we've just been talking about Europe, and I think there's clearly parallels there with the currency union in the Eurozone, about the lack of political union and the problems that's caused in the Eurozone, and also the discussion about Brexit, potentially. I think that the difference between Scotland leaving the UK is that because of the currency union, it's much more integrated into the UK than the UK is into the EU. So I think there's differences there.
Salmon, batted back, and he said he dismissed the UK opposition to sharing the currency as a campaign tactic, not serious prospect, designed to scare the people of Scotland. They've sounded pretty darn serious so far about it, haven't they?
They have, and I guess the key question is the uncertainty. So I mean, no one necessarily knows what will happen, but I think if you're a Scottish voter, you would basically be concerned about the uncertainty.
Stephen, thanks for joining us today. Good to chat to you about the Boris Johnson report and about that big debate last night between Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling.